China's president just said that the country's economic recovery is at a critical stage. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't remember the last time a high-ranking Chinese official talked this cautiously about their economy. So in this video, let's dive deeper into why there's so much concern in China right now, how countries around the world have impacted their economy, and what we can expect to see from China in 2024 and beyond. But before we talk about President Xi's concerns, we need to back up and talk about all the issues that China's economy has been having over the last couple weeks and months. The way I see it, there are three main factors that have led to this economic concern, and the first is the housing crisis. In 2020, China's government instituted a 3 red line policy where it outlined 3 leverage criteria that real estate developers would have to meet if they wanted to borrow more money. And if developers violated each of these, they could no longer expand their credit. In 2021, when Evergrande, the largest property developer in China, was making a lot of headlines for its own financial struggles, nearly half of the top 30 developers in China violated at least one of these 3 red line criteria. This meant that many property developers basically out of nowhere had a crackdown on the amount of money they were able to borrow to help fund their operations. And while adding these 3 criteria doesn't really seem like a big deal, it caught the industry off guard. But the criteria was put into place as China was receiving criticism that these real estate practices were turning into a borderline Ponzi scheme. The real estate developers were doing whatever they could to try and keep up with high demand. A high demand that has been commonplace in China, as real estate is seen as the top investment for the country. Anyone in China looking to invest their money typically turn to real estate, which over the last couple of decades has seen their prices skyrocket thanks to this higher demand and heightened loan activity encouraged by the government. So these property developers look to take advantage of this high demand with excessive loans to expand their businesses. And this whatever it takes mindset turned into questionable practices that unfortunately became commonplace, like taking a pre-sale or making a full payment of a property that hasn't even been built yet, meaning that Chinese citizens were making mortgage payments on properties they weren't even living in. But that wasn't really the big concern, as again, real estate is seen as the top investment in China. And in many situations, this led to property developers taking pre-sale funds and using that money to fund other projects that they had already started to work on. This is why we saw a liquidity problem when the government introduced its 3 red lines, because all of a sudden these developers, which were already using new obligations to fund old obligations, lost a key source of their financing to also help fund their operations. Because of concerns around the solvency of the developers and the faith in their ability to actually complete these property developments, many people actually pulled back their purchasing. Through 9 months of 2023, property investment fell by 9.1%, new construction fell by 23.4%, and funds raised by property developers were down 13.5%. It's things like this that have led to the ominous pictures and videos of these apocalyptic ghost cities in China. The developers could turn to renting out these places in the short term to help recoup some of their losses, but even that could be challenging. And through November, home prices fell for the 5th straight month, meaning real estate developers with housing projects under construction will likely receive less for the property than they had anticipated. It's not just the housing market, but Chinese borrowers defaulting in general that have hit record highs. And this leads to the second main factor of the Chinese economic slowdown, which is domestic consumption. Defaults by Chinese borrowers have surged to a new record since the pandemic. A total of 8.54 million people, most of them between the ages of 18 and 59, are officially blacklisted by authorities after missing payments on everything from home mortgages to business loans. While this sounds high, it's only about 1% of the working age of Chinese adults, but it's really hard to push for more domestic consumption when people are already having challenges pay for their everyday lives. Under Chinese law, blacklisted defaulters are blocked from certain economic activities like purchasing an airplane and making payments through mobile apps. So just to summarize, China doesn't want defaulters leaving the country, and they definitely don't want people making convenient purchases sitting on their couch on their phones. That's where China draws the line. But China has made a New Year's resolution to help boost domestic demand for a 2024 economic recovery. And quite frankly, it's needed, as China's November consumer prices fell the fastest it has in the last 3 years. On the surface, prices going down seems like a good thing, right? Yes, but there is a downside, and in this case, that is called deflation. Deflation is a general decline in prices for goods and services, typically associated with a contraction in the supply of money and credit in the economy. Deflation can harm borrowers who can be bound to pay their debts in money that is worth more than the money they borrowed. Once you start to see how all this is intertwined, it really makes a lot more sense. But there is one more thing, because not only is China losing domestic consumption, but global consumption as well. The award for the buzziest word in 2023 has to be de-risking. If you think it's something else, let me know down in the comments. It was a year of the Western world trying to find ways to reduce their exposure to China as a whole, specifically when it comes to certain levels of manufacturing. Now, there are a few different reasons why, but I want to focus on three of them. The first one is the pandemic taught us just how complex and inefficient the global trading system actually is. Too many things were made or developed on the other side of the world, causing massive delays. So countries and companies focused on a strategy shift, and that was by utilizing something called nearshoring. Nearshoring is simply moving the production of your goods or services closer to the consumer base to help avoid delays. And if we look at the United States as an example, this meant moving manufacturing to the Latin American region like Mexico, for example. The second reason for de-risking from China in 2023 was actually more of a business savvy move. China is still probably thought of as a place with cheap labor, but over the last couple decades, their manufacturing wages have gone up significantly. So now they aren't the best deal on the market anymore. So countries and companies are moving some of their lower skilled jobs to countries in the region like India, Vietnam, or Thailand. Since China's manufacturing has such a head start on these other countries when it comes to manufacturing, they simply just have more experience, which is why they warrant higher wages. And I realize I'm saying this in a time when certain industries in China are actually receiving pay decreases, but generally China's manufacturing wages have been increasing. The third and final reason for de-risking from China in 2023 is because of geopolitical tensions. With China being unpredictable in this regard, countries and companies have relied on another manufacturing strategy. This one's called friendshoring. Simply, this is when you move business to countries in the region that you have better economic and political ties to. So if we use the United States as an example again, this means moving operations to countries like India, Singapore, and Vietnam. That was the zoomed out version of de-risking in 2023, but let's zoom back in and now take a look at China's exports and imports for the month of November. For me, the only way I consume news these days is with Ground News. Link in the description if you want to go check them out. But basically, they give you a summarized version of each topic, which publications have reported the story, and what their perceived political biases are, left, center, or right. Believe it or not, there are biases in the media. I know. Crazy stuff. But Ground News helps me consume the news and do research for my videos with as much transparency as possible, which allows me to make my judgment on what the story actually is and not the political lean of the story. Again, that's Ground News, link in the description. Back to China's November exports. At first glance, this headline seems promising as they were up in November and for the first time in 7 months. But if we dig deeper, there is something more interesting that helps tie all of this together. Shipments from China to the European Union and United States were actually down significantly, 5.8% and 8.5% respectively, a piece of information that was not mentioned in all of the articles. So while China was able to increase exports, it was in spite of the Western world reducing their need for China's goods. Which leads us back to the start of this video, as China's president said that the country's economic recovery is at a critical stage. But before we go further, I make videos about world news impacting the dollar and the US economy, so if you like topics like this and want to see more of them, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Besides all of the concerns I've laid out so far, this next one could have the biggest impact of them all. Just like how individuals have credit scores, countries have credit ratings, and there are 3 main credit ratings agencies: Fitch, S&P, and Moody's. And they are responsible for providing the credit outlook based on things like economic stability and financial trust of, quite honestly, the country's government ability to issue and pay back debt. And Moody just downgraded China's debt outlook from negative to stable. Now, in fairness to China, Moody's had just done the same thing to the US a month earlier. And a credit outlook downgrade is more of a warning, but the next step is a complete credit downgrade. And when your credit gets downgraded, it makes things a a little more expensive as the interest rates you can get are a little worse. To be honest, the credit rating is a direct reflection of a country's economic competence, and a downgrade really just means that they haven't been able to show certain signs of stability. And this goes for China, the United States, and really any other country out there with this problem. So hopefully for China's sake, they're able to meet whatever New Year's resolution they set for themselves to get their economy back on track, because everyone is watching and some people aren't impressed. The World Bank just released their 2024 outlook for China, and it was not encouraging. First, let's start with their growth projection for the next couple of years. They expect China's real GDP growth to finish at 5.2% in 2023, then slow to 4.5% and 4.3% respectively over the next couple of years. The short-term headwinds, as they called it, were because of things like the property market downturn lasting longer than expected, softer global demand because of tighter financial conditions, and geopolitical tensions. So basically, the things that are currently a problem are going to remain a problem according to the World Bank. Some other things that stood out to me are included on this chart here. I mentioned the slowdown in GDP growth already, but let's look at this line, which shows the direct foreign investment, basically how much the world is investing into China. The World Bank projects China to be negative in this data point for 2023 and continue that into 2024. This ties very closely into the nearshoring, friendshoring strategies we talked about earlier. The future outlook does seem troubling, but this is definitely not the end of the story. Since there's so much information out there, I made a playlist talking everything about China's economy, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So if you're looking for more information on China's economy, make sure you check out this playlist here.